Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for logging on. I know your time's valuable, so I hope this is really useful for you all. My name is Danny McShane. I'm the Business Development Manager for Tellemachus, and I work with businesses to solve problems using technology. I'm spending an awful lot of time at the moment working with businesses who have concerns about GDPR. This webinar is aimed at answering the most common questions that we encounter. Over the last year and a half, I've learned an awful lot about GDPR, but most often I have to deal with misconceptions that businesses have about GDPR that were picked up from salesmen and companies using fear to sell products. GDPR isn't the bogeyman. It's actually a really fair system that'll make your business more resilient. Now, I'll say up front, I'm not a techie. I do have tech guys within the business who can drill down into the detail, but this is much more of a strategic overview. If anyone wants any more detail on anything we cover, my contact details will be available at the end, and I'll happily facilitate a meeting. And if anyone has any questions, please type them into the text box. Make sure they go to the Tellemachus account, and I'll answer them at the end. Okay, so what will we cover? Well, understanding what GDPR is should be a good start. We'll look at where it came from. We'll then look at how this is going to change the way that businesses interact and live with their data. We'll look at who's going to be ultimately responsible within an organization and what that means. And then we'll look at how businesses will need to adapt, and we'll have some handy hints of how to get started. But before I begin, I'm going to conduct a poll. I'm just looking at who has already started getting ready for GDPR. I'll leave that open for just a few seconds. If you could all vote. Brilliant, it's always a good mix. There's about 2/3 have, 1/3 haven't, 50-50 now. About 50-50. That was just for my information. Okay, so what is GDPR? Well, the General Data Protection Regulation is an amalgamation and an enhancement of 28 existing EU directives. It has the sole purpose of ensuring that companies who collect data are responsible with that data. Responsibility and accountability are at the heart of GDPR compliance. The Information Commissioner of the UK has been very clear on the interpretation that the ICO will be taken in May 2018. As a company, you have chosen to store data electronically. So as a company, you are fully responsible for the proper use and safe keeping of that data, and the ICO will make sure you are held accountable. Interestingly, recent press releases show that fines this year are up 100% year on year as the ICO prepare for GDPR in the UK, and they're hiring over 100 new staff for investigations come May 2018. As for how the ICO will enforce GDPR, the fines are a huge increase on the existing penalties for data loss. There are many aspects that will be looked into when the ICO decide on the level of fine, but here again the same themes of accountability and responsibility are prevalent. The work your organisation does with its people, its processes and its technology will determine the financial penalty. Now, 20 million euros or 4% of global turnover, not profits, and whichever is higher, it's a huge headline figure, and it's been used with great effect to scare many companies. But ultimately, this fine is going to be determined by the processes and procedures that you put in place. Now, this will require a big culture change, but how do you get businesses to change their culture? With the variety of companies storing data, the various verticals and sectors involved, it's nearly impossible to create a single system that works universally. Health and safety legislation took the stick approach, and that was revolutionized in the 90s through personal accountability with corporate manslaughter and through large fines. The end result, workplace deaths have reduced dramatically. Data protection's been promoted through more a gently approach. Government releases law enforcement agencies with guides on 10 steps to better security. Ultimately, that's led us here. GDPR is aiming to be both the carrot and the stick. Cybercrime is now the most common crime in the UK. It's become a multi-billion-pound industry, and companies are still not even adopting the most basic of best practices. But what is GDPR asking of you? Let's have a look at Article 5. This details what's expected when dealing with data. Does any of this seem unfair? Take a moment and read each of the guidelines and consider that as a business, you choose to store people's sensitive data electronically within your network. What could the consequences be if the data you hold on someone was used unlawfully? Is it fair that they should expect you to process the data in an appropriate manner to maintain security? If you choose to store the data, should you not also cost in for the security of that data? Now, some of you might be saying that I have to keep my data for 5, 7, 10 years for legal reasons, and that may be true, but you don't have to store it electronically. These used to be paper records, were boxed and sent to document storage, and the cost of storing the data was factored into the commercial decision making on the contracts. With the advent of the PC, we now store huge amounts of data, but how many organizations make the appropriate considerations for the security of that data? You could still print it out, send it to document storage and delete it from your machines, but the reason it's kept within the business is choice. The reason all businesses hold data is for business reasons. It's better for them to store it. It's cheaper. It's more convenient to access. It's a choice. GDPR just forces you to review what data you hold. To review, do I even need to hold it? Is it secure? What effect could this have on an individual if it was lost? And how much would it cost to secure the data? Making responsible business decisions. Is that unfair? GDPR focuses on personal data. But what is personal data? The ICO define it like this. I mean, the scope of personal data has increased. It now includes items such as IP addresses, GPS locations. But look at that, a living individual, whether in personal or family life, business or profession. Think of your own CRM system, your Outlook contact lists, any spreadsheets you've been working on. Now, the reality is we have no precedent yet with GDPR. There's no case law to revert back to, so we're all trying to make the best of the information that we have. But it's clear that the ICO have cast their net very wide. GDPR does also cover some other aspects of personal information: genetic information, cultural information, economic, as well as the data you would expect. Even small companies will have to consider the implications for GDPR, even if it's only for HR records. But the reality is every business will have to think a little differently for GDPR. But who within the business is responsible? Now, this is the area that I am most used to operating in. Who should be doing something about GDPR? Public sector organisations have to appoint a data protection officer, so it's easier for them in a way. But within your business, who is responsible? I've had IT managers bemoaning directors who won't listen. I've had directors bemoaning IT staff who don't want the extra work. I've seen every side of it. But ultimately, this is a board level decision. It touches on people, processes, and technologies. So it needs to be assessed at a level that has authority over all three areas. A very common thing I hear is, I'm okay, everything's in the cloud. This is a myth. There are two responsible parties involved when the cloud is used to store data. The processor is the person who collects that data and who uses it and who made the decision to outsource the storage. The controller is simply the party who stores that data and who provides access. Both parties are liable under GDPR. If your cloud provider suffers a data loss, you would still be liable. You collected the data, it was your responsibility to keep it safe, and where that data is stored never mitigates your responsibility. And while I'm myth busting, I still hear to this day that Brexit means I won't have to worry about GDPR anymore. Let me clarify. At every level, the government, the ICO, and the National Cybersecurity Centre have all said that GDPR will live on beyond Brexit. In fact, the Digital Economies Bill has taken an even more serious approach. Now, this is an all-party bill aimed at improving the UK's digital infrastructure. It's expected to receive royal assent shortly, cross-party, so regardless of the election, it won't matter. But key within that bill was the requirement to remain consistent with GDPR in a legal framework post-Brexit. Elizabeth Denham, our Information Commissioner, made a wonderful contribution to the bill in October 2016. Her recommendation is that directors are personally liable for breaches of data protection by their companies. Now, not only is GDPR going to be alive and well after Brexit, it's likely going to have extra bite. And just to emphasize the impact of the new regulations, I'm going to give you a couple of examples of breaches and how the consequences would be different under GDPR. There's an ever more urgent need for companies to revisit their risk assessments and decide that with the new information available, is this a risk that you're still willing to take? Now, everyone's seen headlines like these. They're getting more and more common. People are starting to realize the importance of cybersecurity. Most people are familiar with the companies and the trouble that they've run into with data loss incidents over the last couple of years. These represent a mixture of external agents, insider threats, lots of different vectors for the data loss, and everyone's heard of TalkTalk, so it's an easy one to bring up. Now, TalkTalk lost around 16,000 usable pieces of information. They were fined an ICO record amount of £400,000. But if that breach had occurred after May 2018, the fine would have been over £72 million. That's the kind of step change we're talking about when it comes to GDPR. Now, this example is less well known, but a travel company called Think W3 Limited lost 1.2 million credit card details. Their ICO fine was £180,000, which is less than TalkTalk, despite losing many more records. But had this breach happened after May 2018, this is where things would have got a lot worse. Now, Think W3 were a subsidiary of Thomas Cook. Thomas Cook had global turnovers of 8.5 billion. Now, under GDPR, it's the parent company's turnover that's considered in that 4% of global turnover equation. In this case, the GDPR fine would have been around £287 million. Now, if you're part of a larger organisation, or if you have subsidiaries who store data, is it time for a review of your risk assessments? I've spoken a lot about data loss. I'll just take a moment to cover how data is lost. In 2016, there was an analysis of over 130,000 incidents by the Ponemon Institute. They produced the report that's on screen now. In very general terms, a third of all data loss is related to staff or systems making mistakes. Another third is actually physical documents or hardware being stolen. Only 18% is actually traced back to an external agent attacking your network. Now, I only bring this up because the vast majority of security spend within IT is bolstering perimeter protection. Bolstering traditional network perimeter security, it would help avoid only 18% of the data loss incidents we see. It's still really important. Footprinting bots are scanning billions of ports a day looking for vulnerabilities, and this is only getting more prevalent. But the reality is, people, processes and procedures need just as much investment when it comes to security. So May 2018, it's coming fast, and as a business, can you afford to do nothing as data protection undergoes its biggest shake-up in 20 years? But a common thing we run into is, what should I do? There are numerous steps to take when considering GDPR. Re-evaluating risk assessments, staff training and retraining schedules, data retention policies, network and web usage policies, network access rules, network management, outsourced contract reviews, the right to be forgotten, dedicated consent, and this list just keeps on going. But the first essential step to get ready for GDPR is create a plan and get started. If you haven't already, appoint someone within your organization to be responsible for GDPR and give them the license to perform the task properly. If you must, do it yourself. After countless client meetings on GDPR, the absolutely most important thing to do is take that first step. Get the ball rolling. 2018 is fast approaching and there is work to be done. A lot of this will be around training, policies, procedures, IT networks. It can be done internally. If you don't want to bring in external specialist help, you don't need to in the initial stage. There is one aspect of GDPR that will mean real change, and this may mandate third-party assistance. You have to submit the report to the ICO that will ultimately determine your punishment. You have to cover how was that data lost, what data was taken and what data wasn't taken, which user accounts were involved, the bit everyone hates. You have to write a description of the potential consequences of the breach, almost a worst case scenario of what happened. And you then have to look at what mitigations you already have in place or are planning to put in place. This report has to be submitted within 72 hours of you becoming aware of the data loss. Now, it seems like a cruel part of the process. You're handed a rope and asked to make your own noose, but this is actually far from it. This one thing embodies the very nature of GDPR. It's what will separate the responsible companies from the rogue traders who shouldn't hold data. As I run through it, you'll see that in order to comply with the requirements of the report, you must have taken a proactive approach to security. The companies that will be most well equipped to complete this report within 72 hours will be exactly the companies who never have to. And I think that's exactly the point. If you had to write this report today, how would you begin? I'll run the second poll now. Could you complete this report right now within 72 hours? It's always an interesting one. I'll leave it open just a few more seconds. I've still not had anyone yet who said yes. So a lot of you will be able to produce somewhat of the report, which is about what we expect. That leads beautifully on to essential step number 2. Create a data loss response plan. Now, creating this plan enables you as an organization to think through the scenarios of a data loss, to identify who would need to be involved from within the organization, what tasks would you need those people to do. It gives you the opportunity to find a suitable third party to assist in the event of a data loss incident, as well as locate relevant insurance policies that can help cover those costs. Having this response plan and working with it, it brings the business to a level of readiness, but also it raises awareness within the organization, highlights areas of concern, and ultimately it can improve your overall security. Now, the first 3 points cover the data that was lost, but do you know where all your data is? Essential step number 3 is locate and classify all of your data. Knowing the location of your data, especially the sensitive data, it's an absolute must for complying with GDPR. Aside from the security implications, which I'll go into, GDPR contains the right to be forgotten, and the subject access request charges have been scrapped. So the ability to quickly locate data within your network is now more critical than ever. But from a security perspective, data has a tendency to drift very quickly. People making spreadsheets for ease of use, people saving copies to local machines or personal cloud drives, data backup services, mail servers, email attachments, removable media, copy and paste, print screen. The amount of ways that people use data is seemingly limitless. Often unintentionally, staff move sensitive information to areas you would never expect. Now, software is available that can scan every operating system, every database, cloud storage, all servers, all file types. It automatically scans all of your data and reports on the location of that data, but more importantly, the location of the sensitive data. Now, just another very quick poll. How many of you know where all of your data is? Not where it should be, but actually where it is. I usually get around 50-50. Okay, thank you. So about 67% wouldn't know. So knowing the location, particularly of the sensitive information, is critical. And it allows for essential step number 4, manage user access. Once you know where all of your sensitive data is and you've brought it back into an area that you can control, then it's all about managing who has access to that data. This is something that's included in the report to encourage organizations to constantly and regularly review who has access to sensitive data. Do they need access to this data? By limiting the number of people who have access, you significantly limit the chances of data being lost. I've seen companies build a secure database and spend tens of thousands of pounds on access management software to secure access to that database. And I've then seen users log on, export all of that data in a spreadsheet so that they can run reports and save those spreadsheets that contain all of that sensitive data on file servers with universal access rights. This is something that is far more common than you might expect. Now, technology is available to keep your data safe. The reason GDPR is happening now is because the technology is available to comply. You have the ability to click on any file in a file directory and immediately see who has access to those files, to see if those files contain any sensitive information. You can see a history of everyone who's accessed the files and what they've done with it, a summary of what sensitive information is included within entire directories. There's a screenshot on there of an email being stopped before it was sent. The reason is it contains sensitive information. There are also tools that allow that email to be sent, but it'll redact that sensitive information. There are tools that can encrypt it before the email is sent. and you have to come back to an admin for permission to read it. The tool, the bottom right screenshot, obviously this goes into a level of technical detail I'll not dwell on, but the functionality is there for when you have sensitive information open on your system, the system automatically disables copy, paste, snipping tool, print screen, drag and drop. Basically, it ensures that no one can remove information from within your network without your consent. Once that data has been classified, it cannot be exfiltrated. All the alerts are logged, easily reviewed, so you can see who's been trying to send or copy sensitive data, who's accessed it, and see if any patterns occur. This is the part that most people think is extra specially cruel. Worst case scenario, what are the consequences of the data loss? And you have to include this in the report you submit to the ICO that will ultimately determine the financial penalty you face. This has two functions. One, it allows the people who've been affected by the data loss to be notified as quickly as possible so that they can take any steps to prevent impact from the data loss, such as contacting a bank or notifying any financial authorities. But two, and I think most importantly, it forces you as an organisation to own the responsibility for a data loss and the subsequent consequences of it. Businesses that recognise the risks in advance are much more likely to be proactive and prevent a data loss. Remember, organisations choose to store data. And this leads on to essential step number 5. Delete the data. Now, far from being silly, what use is your data? How often is it accessed? When was the last time it was accessed? Organisations spend lots of money storing and securing data that may be of no business use. If it isn't being used, if it isn't delivering a business benefit, if it isn't adding value, delete it. You reduce the risk of a data loss by reducing the data you hold. I mean, you'll save money and energy not paying for storage or server space for redundant data. Deleting the surplus data is very good practice. And then how can you ever stop it? What mitigations are already in place or planned? See, this is the bit where it comes full circle, and it's exactly what I meant by those companies that can produce the report within 72 hours are exactly the ones who won't need to. The mitigations are simply the things that you really should have done if you'd have considered the risk in the first place. So training your staff to know what a phishing email is, what to click and what not to click. Keeping a log of training records, and you're starting to comply. Putting in place data retention policies, web use policies, network policies, you're starting to comply. But by getting started now, appointing someone to start assessing GDPR, considering and putting in place a data loss response plan, by locating and classifying your data, managing who can access it and what they can do with it, and by deleting surplus data, you are complying with GDPR. None of these are unreasonable requests. The technology is available. Would you like to know where all of your sensitive data is? Would you like to ensure that only those who are authorized can access that sensitive information? Would you like to know when data was accessed to allow surplus data to be deleted? Would you like to prevent sensitive data from leaving your network? As an organization, the choice is yours. I'd like to finish with a final poll. It's actually a repeat of the first poll. Given what I've said now, how many of you are planning to do something with GDPR? I've actually forgotten what the first one was, but it's 100% now, so I'm going to claim a victory for that one. Okay, well, listen, thank you very much. I really appreciate you spending your time with us. I hope you've enjoyed the webinar.